We all know who the greatest players in NBA history are. Guys like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, even Larry Bird. Their names alone carry weight. Say Michael Jordan in any country on earth and people know exactly who you're talking about. But here's the thing. For every Michael Jordan, there's someone on the complete opposite end of that spectrum. Someone who stood on that same draft night stage, shook that same commissioner's hand, put on that same hat, and then went out and had one of the most historically bad careers the league has ever seen. And today, well, we're talking about those guys. And before you say anything, we're not just cherry picking guys who had one bad year and got sent home. Every single player in this video played a minimum of 3 NBA seasons. That's 3 years at the highest level of basketball on the planet, which should be more than enough time to prove yourself. Some of these guys even had a decade, and it still wasn't enough. We're starting with a man who spent 11 seasons in the NBA. 11 seasons. This man shared locker rooms with some of the greatest players the league has ever seen. He played alongside Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen. He has an NBA championship ring. And somewhere along the way, the internet decided he was the greatest player who ever lived.
Oh, the man, the myth, the legend, the White Mamba.
The only problem is that stat sheet tells a completely different story. Brian Scalabrine was a second-round pick out of USC in 2001, selected 35th overall by the New Jersey Nets. And look, being a second-round pick doesn't automatically make you a bad player, but let's be real about what 35th overall means. Gilbert Arenas went 31 in that same draft. Mehmet Okur went 38th. Both of those guys made the All-Star game. Scalabrine spent his career averaging 3 points per game. In 11 NBA seasons, across the Nets, the Celtics, and the Bulls, Scalabrine played 520 games and scored a grand total of 1,594 career points. But here's the thing about Scal that makes him different from everyone else on this list. He knew exactly who he was. He never pretended to be something he wasn't. He showed up every single day, worked his tail off, and carved out a role on winning teams, not because of what he could do on the court, but because of what he brought to the locker room. He was even on 2 finals teams in New Jersey. I remember this like it was yesterday, but this man caught fire in triple overtime against my Pistons in Game 5 of the semifinals. He legit shot 6 for 7, totaling for 17 points.
Scalabrine, he beats the clock for 3. Of all people, Brian Scalabrine knocks down the 3 to end the half.
Later on, he ended up winning a championship in Boston in 2008. He played 0 playoff minutes that entire postseason and still got a ring. And his response?
But in 5 years, you guys are gonna forget. In 10 years, I'll still be a champ. In 20 years, I'll tell my kids I probably started. And in 30 years, I probably told them I got the MVP. So I'm really not too worried about it.
He was right, because what happened next turned Brian Scalabrine into something no stat line could ever measure. During the 2013 offseason, a Boston radio station organized what they called the Scalenge. They found 4 regular people off the street who said they could beat Scalabrine in basketball, so they ended up putting him against him one-on-one. He won all 4 games and didn't break a sweat doing it. And the final result was 44-6. And that's the thing about all these players in today's video. They might be some of the worst players in NBA history, but compared to me and you, Scalabrine said it best.
I may suck for an NBA player, but I don't suck compared to you. Like, you suck compared to me. I suck compared to Derrick Rose and Russell Westbrook and those guys.
And that day proves something that this entire list is built around. The gap between the worst player in the NBA and the best player on your street is so enormous, it's almost incomprehensible. Brian Scalabrine couldn't guard Kobe Bryant, but he could absolutely destroy every single person watching this right now, and it wouldn't even be close. He never averaged more than 6.3 points in a season. He shot 34.4% from 3 for his entire career. By every traditional measure, he was one of the least productive players in the league for over a decade. And today, he's a national NBA broadcaster on NBC Sports and Peacock, calling the biggest games in the league every single week. The guy who averaged 3 points for his career now sits courtside analyzing the best players on the planet. The guy who played 0 playoff minutes on a championship team now breaks down championship basketball for millions of people. Brian Scalabrine didn't just survive the NBA, he outlasted it. Not bad for the White Mamba. Not everyone on this list had the tools to be great, but our next player genuinely did. The size, the passing, the feel for the game, everything you'd want in a modern point guard. Everything except the one thing you absolutely cannot survive without in today's NBA. This one hurts to talk about because I watched every single minute of it. The 7th pick in the 2020 NBA draft was a French-American point guard who had been playing professional basketball in Europe since he was 16 years old. Killian Hayes was the son of a professional player. He had basketball DNA in his blood, and coming off of a standout season in Germany, averaging nearly 12 points and 5.5 assists in the Euro Cup play, scouts raved about his playmaking creativity and his ability to see the floor in ways most players his age simply couldn't. What they didn't mention loudly enough was that he couldn't shoot, not just a work in progress. I'm talking historically bad. In 210 games with the Pistons across 4 seasons, Killian Hayes shot 38% from the field with a true shooting percentage of 45% and 27% from 3. To put that into context, the league average from the three-point line during that same period hovered around 36%. Hayes was nearly 10 points below that for 4 consecutive years with no meaningful improvement. In the modern NBA, where floor spacing is everything, a point guard who can't make defenses respect him from outside isn't just a liability. He becomes a problem that quietly infects everything around him. And here's where it sort of gets complicated, because it wasn't entirely his fault. Under head coach Dwayne Casey, Hayes was regularly thrown into situations he wasn't ready for. He was asked to carry offensive responsibilities his mechanics couldn't support, and never given a consistent role that let him build on his strengths. The development infrastructure around him in those early Detroit years wasn't what he needed for the player of his profile. And then Monty Williams arrived for the 23-24 season, carrying a massive contract and a mandate to fix everything fast. Rather than finding Hayes a role that suited what he could actually offer, Monty Williams was starting him at shooting guard alongside Cade Cunningham, a position Hayes had never been asked to play at the NBA level. Hayes was a natural point guard being played out of position on a team that already had its point guard. His numbers that final season reflected exactly that. 6.9 points per game, 41% from the field, and 29% from 3. And after the Pistons recorded the longest 28-game losing streak of all time, Detroit had to make an uncomfortable decision. On February 8th, 2024, the Pistons waived him. And I hope I speak for all of us when I say this, because what came next, you just have to respect. Killian Hayes didn't disappear quietly. He went to the G League and he competed with the Long Island Nets and later the Cleveland Charge. He was putting up 22 points and 8.5 assists per game, showing flashes of everything that made him a lottery pick in the first place. He was fighting for his career for a year in the G League, and eventually that fight got him back through the door. The Sacramento Kings came calling with a 10-day contract in early 2026, and later signed him for a 2-year deal. Although regardless of that incredible feat, the Kings this season, I mean, we all know they'll take anybody with a beating heart and a pair of shoes. But Killian earned it. He got back to the NBA when most people had already written him off. The only problem is that even with the Kings, he's shooting worse from the field and worse from 3 than he has in his entire career. The shot still hasn't come around. Regardless of that shot going in or not, he's still shooting. At 24 years old, there's still time. But the Pistons fan in me can't help wondering what could have been if just one of those coaches had figured out how to unlock what was clearly there all along. Killian Hayes at least had a skill set worth debating. Our next player somehow lasted 12 years in the NBA on the strength of almost nothing. Not a scoring threat, not a playmaker, just a body that kept showing up and kept finding his way onto rosters despite averaging 2 points per game for over a decade. And unfortunately for him, he just couldn't block out that noise. I can. This video is sponsored by Raycon. Mother's Day is right around the corner, and if you're anything like me, I actually wanted to find her something that she would use. My mom goes for like 5 to 10-mile walks every single day, and she doesn't wear headphones because she wants to be aware of her surroundings. And for me, there's nothing I want more for my mom than to be safe on her morning walks or evening walks, running errands. I mean, think about how many times you've seen your mom pick up the phone in the store and yell obnoxiously because she thinks that somebody can't hear her. Here's what makes these so much more different than all the other headphones out there. Instead of sitting in your ears, they sit right outside of them and send the vibration of the sound through your bones. You still get that clear, crisp audio, except now you can stay aware to everything around you. I can't tell you the last time I've charged these bad boys. 13 hours of battery life, not to mention they're IP68 waterproof and dustproof. Just the other day, I was playing pickup basketball and they stayed on the entire time. Didn't have to readjust, didn't have to pick them up when they dropped. They were good. I mean, hey, there's a reason that over 3 million customers already trust them. Plus, when you order through my link, you are directly supporting this channel, which means I can pump out more and more and better videos. Celebrate the moms in your life, because without our moms, we're actually nothing. Go to buyraycon.com/JZUnkutBC to get 15% off your bone conduction headphones. Major thanks again to Raycon for sponsoring today's video. DeSagana Diop was the 8th pick in the 2001 NBA draft, selected by the Cleveland Cavaliers out of Oak Hill Academy, one of the most prestigious prep programs in the country. And on paper, the selection made some sense. At 7 feet tall and 280 pounds, with a frame that looked like it was designed in a lab to protect a basketball rim, Diop was a physical specimen unlike almost anything scouts had seen coming out of high school, leading Oak Hill to a perfect 33-0 record and a #1 national ranking. He was being compared to Dikembe Mutombo immediately, but what nobody mentioned was that Diop had only been playing basketball for 2 years. Born in Senegal, Diop didn't pick up a basketball until he was 15 years old. A scout spotted him, saw the raw physical tools, and within just a couple of years, he was being fast-tracked through one of America's elite prep programs and onto the NBA draft board. The league was obsessed with upside in that era. Cleveland ended up pulling the trigger and brought him to Ohio, passing on Joe Johnson, Zach Randolph, Tony Parker, and Gilbert Arenas all in that same process. All 4 of those players that I mentioned made the All-Star game, and Diop ended up averaging 2 points per game for his entire career. 4 seasons with the Cavaliers produced almost nothing statistically, and Cleveland eventually moved on. But then something strange happened. Diop landed with the Dallas Mavericks and actually started to look like a real NBA player. Not a scorer, not a creator, but a legitimate defensive presence. In the 2005-2006 season, he ranked 4th in the entire NBA in blocks per 48 minutes. He started 45 games on a 60-win Mavericks team that reached the NBA Finals. He played through a broken nose in the playoffs and blocked 2 Tim Duncan shots in a single game. Dallas fans made a viral remix of a Criss Cross song in his honor. For one brief window, DeSagana Diop actually looked like he belonged. And that brief window was enough to earn him a 6-year, $32 million contract when he re-signed with Dallas in 2008. $32 million for a player averaging 2 points per game. The contract was mocked immediately and never looked better with age. He was eventually shipped to the Charlotte Bobcats, where he became a cornerstone of one of the worst teams in NBA history.
Kemba, he'll take the shot, no, and Jock can't make it go.
The 2011-2012 Bobcats finished with a record of 7-59, the worst winning percentage in league history at the time. Diop averaged 1.8 points per game that season. He had a free throw attempt that year that landed several feet short of the rim. Not short of the basket, short of the rim entirely. Through 12 seasons and 5 different teams, DeSagana Diop kept getting contracts. Because here's the honest truth about why he lasted as long as he did. He could protect the rim well enough that coaches convinced themselves that the offense would eventually come. And of course, it never did. He finished his career with 1,185 points across 601 games. And honestly, what's remarkable is what came after the NBA. Diop took everything the NBA taught him and poured it into coaching. He became an assistant with the Utah Jazz, then the Houston Rockets, making him the first Senegal-born coach to hold a role on the NBA bench. He's currently the head coach of the Westchester Knicks in the G League, where he won back-to-back showcase championships. And on top of all of that, he also coaches the Senegal national team. The man who spent 12 years averaging 2 points per game is now building the next generation of basketball players from the ground up. Diop survived 12 years by staying quiet, staying out of the way, and letting his size do just enough to justify a roster spot. However, our next player announced himself to the world in the loudest, most unforgettable ways possible on draft night. And then he spent the next 3 years proving he had no business being there. The date was June 23rd, 2011. The Washington Wizards are on the clock at number 6. Commissioner David Stern steps up to the podium, announces the pick, and before the echo of his own name has even faded, Jan Vesely leaps from his seat and plants a full, passionate kiss on his girlfriend on national television. The crowd went wild. Charles Barkley lost his mind on the broadcast. It was charming and genuinely one of the most joyful draft night moments anybody could remember. Unfortunately for Jan, that kiss was the peak of his NBA career. Everything after it was a slow, painful descent back to reality. Coming out of Europe, Vesely was considered one of the most athletically gifted big men in the draft. Standing at 6'11" with a frame that could finish above the rim on anyone, he spent his pre-draft years winning 9 club trophies with the KK Partizan in Belgrade and was also named the 2010 FIBA Europe Young Men's Player of the Year award. Scouts compared him to Andrei Kirilenko, and when somebody asked him about being called the European Blake Griffin, he flipped it and called Griffin the American Jan Vesely. His confidence was real. The hype was real. The Wizards were convinced that they had finally found something special. And what they found instead was a player with the worst free throw shooting in recent NBA memory and had absolutely no idea what to do with the ball in his hands. When Vesely first stepped onto an NBA court, his first shot was a free throw. He airballed it, like completely. At one point during a game, his teammate Jordan Crawford literally tried to shoot Vesely's free throws for him after he got fouled. The referee caught it, nullified the made basket, gave the ball back to Vesely, and he missed both free throws anyway. They thought they had found a star. What they actually found was a player who couldn't shoot, couldn't create off the dribble, had no reliable post game, and also just so happened to shoot 27% from the free throw line in his third NBA season. In 162 NBA games across 3 seasons with Washington and a brief stint in Denver, Vesely averaged 3.5 points and 3.5 rebounds per game, and never developed the offensive versatility that might have justified keeping him on the roster. I mean, let's just say this one more time. The Wizards passed on Kemba Walker at 9, Klay Thompson at 11, Kawhi Leonard at 15 to take him 6th. Washington walked away with 3 seasons of 3.5 points per game and one very memorable kiss. By 2014, he was gone from the NBA entirely and headed back home to Europe. The man who couldn't make a free throw to save his life in the NBA went back to Europe and became one of the greatest players the continent has ever seen. Under the legendary EuroLeague coach Obradovic at Fenerbahce, Vesely fixed his free throw shooting, fixed his game, and became an entirely different player. He won the 2017 EuroLeague championship. He was named the 2018-19 EuroLeague MVP. He made 3 All-EuroLeague first-team selections and was named to the EuroLeague All-Decade team for the entire 2010s.
Make the opposite happen, of course, as Vesely takes off and throws it down. Jan Vesely.
He even represented the Czech Republic at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics and scored 13 points against Team USA. At 35 years old, he's still playing for FC Barcelona in one of the best leagues in the world. The NBA had him for 3 years and couldn't figure out what to do with him. Europe got him for over a decade and turned him into an absolute legend. Sometimes the wrong stage can make even the right actor look like a fraud. Vesely at least had a real basketball career, just not in the league that drafted him. Our next player had no such thing as a consolation prize. He was the first high school player ever taken #1 overall in NBA history, handpicked by the greatest basketball player who ever lived, and spent 12 seasons never once living up to a single expectation that came with that very phone call. Kwame Brown grew up in Brunswick, Georgia, and by his senior year at Glenn Academy, he was the consensus #1 high school prospect in the entire country. The numbers backed it all up: 20 points, 13 rebounds, and nearly 6 blocks per game. He was a Parade All-American, a McDonald's All-American, and had already signed a letter of intent to play at the University of Florida. But instead, he declared for the NBA draft. Standing at 6'11" and 270 pounds with fluid athleticism and an enormous ceiling, the league had never seen a high school prospect quite like him. We all know Michael Jordan, right? Well, at the time, he was serving as president of basketball operations for the Washington Wizards. He was captivated after a pre-draft workout. Kwame Brown reportedly told Doug Collins that if they drafted him, they'd never regret it. So Jordan pulled the trigger and made history, selecting Kwame Brown with the first overall pick in the 2001 NBA draft, passing on Pau Gasol at 3, Tony Parker at 28, and Zach Randolph at 19 in the process. What followed in Washington was one of the most brutal situations any young player has ever been thrown into. Brown was 18 years old, drafted onto a team being run by the most competitive human being who had ever touched a basketball, and expected to perform at a level that would have been unfair to ask of almost any teenager on the planet. To put it nicely, Jordan's methods were intense. Veterans were brought into practice specifically to physically punish Brown on a daily basis. Charles Oakley was reportedly brought in to threaten Kwame Brown in the locker room, and Jordan himself was relentless in his criticism, publicly and privately. Brown spoke about it years later, and here's the thing about Kwame Brown that gets lost in the bus narrative. He wasn't actually a useless basketball player. His career field goal percentage was 49%, which is genuinely efficient. Not great for a big man, but still decent. He had games where he looked like exactly the player that Jordan thought that he was drafting. In March of 2004, he put up 30 points and 19 rebounds against Sacramento. His best stretches with the Lakers showed a player who could defend, rebound, and finish around the rim at a level that justified roster spots on contending teams.
Man, they drop strong to the rack. Well, he said, if you're not going to guard me, I'll take the easy one. He gets the deuce.
He was even part of the trade package that brought Pau Gasol to Los Angeles, the move that fueled back-to-back championships in 2009 and 2010. Unfortunately for Kwame, that was the closest he ever came to a championship, being traded for the guy that ended up winning championship. I'm sorry. But here's the thing. When you're a #1 pick, that requires something. It requires a franchise cornerstone. It requires a generational talent. It requires the kind of player who changes the trajectory of an organization. And across 12 seasons and 7 different teams, Kwame Brown never came close to being that. He averaged 6.5 points and 5.5 rebounds for his entire career. Never made an all-star game, and bounced from Washington to Los Angeles to Memphis to Detroit to Charlotte to Golden State to Philadelphia, all without ever finding a permanent home. Fortunately for Brown, he made approximately $64 million doing it. After retiring, Brown largely disappeared from the public conversation for years. Then in 2021, he came back swinging. He launched a YouTube channel and started firing back at every analyst, commentator, and former player who had spent years using his name as a punchline.
Talk about people's family, talking about stuff that ain't got nothing to do with basketball, all because you couldn't play?
Matt Barnes, Steven Jackson, Gilbert Arenas, Stephen A. Smith. Nobody was off limits.
They gave up Kwame Brown. Who
first
cares?
rounders.
I could care less.
And of course, you guys might remember the videos went viral almost immediately.
Everything that I say now has been invalidated by this word bust. I'm a #1 draft pick. You're looking at history in a room.
People who had dismissed him for 2 decades suddenly found themselves watching a man they thought they knew tell his own story in his own words for the very first time. His YouTube channel now has over 450,000 subs and has more than 62 million total views. Kwame Brown spent 12 years being defined by other people's expectations. He's spent the years since making sure that that never happens again. Kwame Brown was a #1 pick who never became what the league needed him to be, but at least Washington was rebuilding. Our next player was taken #2 overall by a team that was already a contender in the most loaded draft class in NBA history, ahead of 3 future Hall of Famers, and then spent his entire rookie year sitting at the end of the bench so deep that the only time he saw the court was when the game was already decided by 30 points. That same team went on to win the NBA championship that very season with him barely setting foot on the floor. They didn't call him a bust. They called him the human victory cigar. Darko Milicic was born in Serbia, and from a young age, it was clear that he was built differently. He joined KK Hemofarm at 14 years old, and by 18, he was being compared to players who hadn't existed before. ESPN's Chad Ford, the most respected draft analyst in the country at the time, wrote that Darko was truly one of a kind. One scout compared him to a young Wilt Chamberlain. The hype was absolutely stratospheric. Joe Dumars is a 2-time NBA champion and a 1-time Finals MVP with the Bad Boys, and in 2004, he was also the GM for the Pistons. He said that during the pre-draft workout for Darko Milicic, he went through the entire practice without missing a single shot, which leads us into one of the most catastrophic draft night moments in NBA history. The 2003 NBA draft started off with LeBron James, the most anticipated prospect in the history of American basketball. At pick #2 was Darko Milicic. Pick #3, Carmelo Anthony, who ended up being a future Hall of Famer and a 10-time All-Star. Pick #4 had Chris Bosh, another future Hall of Famer and also an NBA champion. And then at pick #5, Dwayne Wade, future Hall of Famer, NBA champion, and one of the greatest shooting guards who had ever lived. The Pistons had the second pick via trade, not because they were bad the year before. In fact, quite the opposite. They were in the conference finals against the New Jersey Nets just the year before, and then they were blessed with a second pick in the draft. They wanted a long-term project who could extend the championship window, a 7-footer who could shoot from the perimeter and defend at an elite level. Darko Milicic fit that profile on paper. The problem was that paper and basketball court are 2 very different places. Under head coach Larry Brown, who was famously allergic to playing rookies regardless of their talent level, Darko spent his entire first season as a spectator. In 34 games, he averaged 1.5 points and 1.5 rebounds in under 6 minutes per game. He didn't even score his first NBA point until December. The Pistons won the championship that season, becoming the greatest upset story, beating the Los Angeles Lakers in 5 games. And Darko Milicic, the supposed centerpiece of Detroit's future, appeared in the celebration photos looking like a guy who wandered in from the parking lot. He was the youngest NBA champion in history at 18 years and 356 days old, and he had done almost nothing to earn it. What made it truly devastating was who was watching. Darko sat on that bench while Carmelo Anthony was dropping 21 points per game in Denver, while Dwayne Wade was becoming a superstar in Miami, while Chris Bosh was developing into an all-star in Toronto. The 3 players taken directly after him were building Hall of Fame careers in real time. And Darko was warming his seat in Detroit, waiting for a blowout big enough to justify his presence. After Detroit eventually moved on, Darko bounced to Orlando, to Memphis, to New York, to Minnesota, and even to Boston across 10 seasons, never finding a consistent home and never living up to what his draft position promised.
Oh my God, that's gonna go
Tapped up and
That's
in.
crazy.
His time in Memphis was actually really dark. He later admitted that he was deeply depressed, counting days off a calendar just to get through the NBA season. Completely disconnected from the game he was supposed to love. With the Knicks, he openly told management not to trade for him, warning them that he would ruin the team's chemistry, and they ended up trading for him anyway. His best stretch in the NBA came surprisingly late, with the Minnesota Timberwolves in 2010-2011, where he averaged almost 9 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game, and also ranked 5th in the league in blocks. It was a genuine flash of everything scouts had seen him in years earlier. But by then, unfortunately, the narrative was already written and nobody was really paying attention. He ended ended up retiring at 28 years old. Not because of injury, not because teams stopped calling. He simply walked away, returned to Serbia, and announced that he was done playing basketball. He took up kickboxing, debuting in front of his hometown crowd. Then he invested $8 million into a 125-acre apple orchard in Serbia, complete with a man-made lake stocked with over 10,000 fish. The man who was taken second overall in the greatest draft in NBA history is currently farming apples in the Serbian countryside. In a 2017 ESPN profile, which I highly recommend you go watch, Darko Milicic reflected on everything with a clarity that was almost unsettling. He said that the old Darko Milicic felt like someone who had already died. That when he thought about himself during his playing days, it felt like thinking about a completely different person. He admitted that he thought he was the one, that he didn't have to work, that he came drunk to practices trying to be a bad boy. And then he said the thing that makes his story genuinely heartbreaking rather than just another bust story. He said that he did all of this to himself. Carmelo Anthony played until 2022 and scored 28,289 career points. Dwayne Wade is in the Hall of Fame. Chris Bosh is in the Hall of Fame. Darko Milicic is growing apples in Serbia, and he says he's never been happier. Maybe that is the most honest ending that his story could have ever had. Darko at least had an excuse. He landed on a veteran team that had no use for him and a coach who refused to play rookies. Our next player had every opportunity in the world handed to him and still couldn't figure it out. He was the #1 pick in the 2013 NBA draft, the first Canadian ever taken #1 overall. And to this day, no #1 pick in the history of this league has ever produced less. Anthony Bennett grew up in the Jane and Finch neighborhood of Toronto, Ontario, one of the tougher parts of the city, and worked his way through the system the right way. He spent 1 year at UNLV, averaged 16 points and 8 rebounds per game, shooting 53% from the field. The numbers were good enough to put him on the draft board, but almost nobody had him as a top 3 pick going into draft night. Most analysts had him projected somewhere between 5 and 10. A handful of people didn't have him in the lottery at all. And when Commissioner David Stern walked to the podium and announced Anthony Bennett's name, well, the reaction speaks volumes.
Anthony Bennett of Toronto, Canada.
His own draft class thought he didn't belong in the lottery. Cleveland put him first overall anyway. What followed next was historically, almost impressively bad. Bennett missed his first 16 shot attempts across his first 4 games. Not just struggling, completely unable to put the ball in the basket. He finally made one in his 5th game, then went 2 more games without a make. He shot 35% from the field as a rookie. He never started a single game all season. And most damning of all, it took him 33 games to score in double figures for the first time. Every previous #1 pick in NBA history had done it within their first 11 games. Bennett took 3 times as long to do it once. Cleveland ended up trading him to Minnesota after just 1 season as a part of the Kevin Love deal. Minnesota gave him more minutes and slightly more opportunity, and he responded with his best NBA season, which was 5 points per game. He moved to Toronto, where he shot 29% from the field and was eventually assigned to the D-League, becoming the first #1 pick in history to be sent to the minor leagues. Then Brooklyn, where he played 23 games before being waived in January 2017. He was 23 years old and already unemployable in the NBA, never averaging more than 5.2 points per game, never starting more than just a handful of games, suddenly gone from the league before most players have even figured out their role. Former Cavaliers executive David Griffin was blunt about what went wrong. He said the issue with Bennett was that the kid had no desire to overcome adversity whatsoever, that as soon as things got hard, he was out. Weight and conditioning concerns emerged almost immediately after the draft. He had undergone surgery for sleep apnea and a rotator cuff issue before his rookie season had even started, meaning he arrived at training camp already behind physically and never fully caught up mentally. But here's the other side of that story. A player who most analysts didn't have in their top 5 was placed under the weight of being the #1 pick on a franchise desperately searching for direction. The pressure that comes with that label would have broken most people, and none of the support infrastructure to survive it. Whether the failure was his or the organization's or some combustible combination of both is a question that probably doesn't have a clean answer. What we do know, unfortunately, is the stat sheet. 4.4 points per game, 39% from the field, 151 total NBA games, a career that was effectively over before most players have finished the rookie contracts. As of right now, Bennett is still playing basketball professionally, bouncing between leagues in Taiwan, Puerto Rico, and most recently, Bahrain. He made over $16 million in his NBA career. He's 32 years old and still competing somewhere on the planet every season, which says something about his love for the game, even if the NBA ultimately decided it wasn't mutual. By the way, the 2013 NBA draft, one that was called weak going in, the one that produced the worst #1 pick in league history, also produced Giannis Antetokounmpo at 15 and Rudy Gobert at 27. 2 of the best players of their generation, both drafted after Anthony Bennett. Unfortunately for Bennett, the draft doesn't care about narratives. It just keeps moving. And Anthony Bennett will forever be the cautionary tale it left behind. This next guy I want to talk about, I genuinely could not find any footage from his career except for one very well-known clip that you might have already seen. Michael Ruffin was a chemical engineering major at the University of Tulsa with a 3.77 GPA. He was honored with an award recognizing just 8 college athletes in the entire country for combining athletic and academic excellence at the highest level. On it though, the numbers tell a very different story. In 9 NBA seasons across 6 different teams, Ruffin averaged 1.7 points and 2.5 fouls per game. In his entire career, he had more fouls than points. He never made a single three-pointer in his entire career. Michael Ruffin will forever be remembered for one single play. The date was March 30th, 2007. Washington was up 3 with under 4 seconds left.
And it's a deflection by Ruffin. And the play continues. Peterson got it! I don't believe it! I don't believe it!
It's one of the most baffling individual plays in NBA history. He played 26 minutes, grabbed 5 rebounds, got a steal, committed 4 fouls, and didn't score a singular point. That is Michael Ruffin's entire career in one single box score. And of course, every era of NBA basketball has its signature draft mistake. The late 90s had Olo Akandi, 2003 had Darko, and 2002 had a 7-footer from the country of Georgia who the Denver Nuggets were convinced was going to be the next Dirk Nowitzki. Nikoloz Tskitishvili grew up in Georgia, but by the time he landed in Italy under coach Mike D'Antoni, here was a 7-footer who could shoot from the perimeter, handle the ball, and move like someone half his size. And in 2002, that description was basically a cheat code for getting drafted high. The NBA was in the middle of what analysts call Dirk FOMO. Every team in the league was desperately searching for the next Dirk Nowitzki, a 7-foot European who could shoot threes and change the way their offense functioned. Tskitishvili fit that profile on paper well enough that the Denver Nuggets convinced themselves he was worth a 5th overall pick, passing on Amari Stoudemire in that same process. Stoudemire went 9th, became a 6-time All-Star, and was Rookie of the Year that same season. Tskitishvili averaged 2.9 points per game for his career. His career win shares total of negative 1.6 is one of the worst of any lottery pick in NBA history. He started 16 games as a rookie, showed almost nothing, and his role shrank every season after that until there was essentially no role left, and was out of the league entirely by age 23. In a 2025 interview, he was remarkably honest about what went wrong. He said he didn't have much knowledge back then. He didn't know about hiring extra coaches, about finding people to guide him off the court. He said if you draft somebody 5th overall from Europe, you have to raise them like a child, and nobody did that for him. He said it was like coming from a different planet. The infrastructure simply wasn't there. And a 19-year-old kid from Tbilisi who had been playing serious basketball for only a few years was asked to compete against the best players on earth with almost no support system around him. After leaving the NBA, he spent the next 15 years playing for 25 different teams across 12 different countries. At one point, he was making $100,000 a month playing overseas, paid in cash delivered in suitcases. He said he'd never seen so much cash in his life that when he got bored, he would just take it out and count it for no reason. As of right now, at 42 years old, Tskitishvili is back home in Tbilisi serving as vice president of the Georgian Basketball Federation, distributing equipment across the country, and still playing in a local Masters League while he's averaging 25 points per game. He co-owns a winery and a clothing brand with his wife. He said recently that he doesn't consider himself a bust because nobody should expect a 19-year-old kid to come out and dominate the NBA. From a guy who went from the 5th pick in the NBA draft to counting cash in suitcases to running Georgian basketball from a boardroom at 42, maybe that's exactly the right attitude to have. Every player on this list cost their team something. A wasted pick, a bad contract, a few seasons of going nowhere. Our next player cost his team 2 of the greatest players of their generation in a single night. The Memphis Grizzlies had 1 pick. They passed on James Harden and Steph Curry in the same breath to take a 7'3" center who averaged 2 points per game for his career. Hasheem Thabeet was born in Tanzania and didn't pick up basketball until he was 15 years old. He moved to Houston for high school, then became one of the most dominant defensive forces college basketball had seen in years at the University of Connecticut. In his junior season, he averaged 13.5 points, 11 rebounds, and almost 4.5 blocks per game on 64% shooting. He recorded a triple-double with 10 blocks against Providence. And of course, the comparisons to Mutombo were everywhere. Here was a 7'3" rim protector with elite shot-blocking instincts who could anchor a defense for the next decade. Memphis was rebuilding and needed exactly that. They took him 2nd overall in 2009. James Harden went 3rd. Steph Curry went 7th. Harden won an MVP award, made 11 All-Star teams, and has scored over 27,000 career points. Curry won 4 championships, 2 MVP awards, and redefined how basketball is played at every level from the NBA all the way down to youth rec leagues. Between just the 2 of them, they represent arguably the most talent Memphis walked away from in a single draft night decision. And what did they get instead? In 5 NBA seasons across 5 different teams, Thabeet averaged just over 2 points, 2.5 rebounds, and less than 1 block per game. The blocks, the entire reason he was drafted, essentially vanished at the NBA level. His hands were a chronic problem. He struggled to catch passes in the post. His footwork was clumsy and his offensive game never developed beyond the most basic finishes around the rim. He was sent to the D-League during his rookie season, becoming the tallest and highest drafted player ever assigned there at the time. He played for Memphis, Houston, Portland, Oklahoma City, and Toronto without ever finding a consistent role on any of those teams. And you know what? The pre-draft scouting reports had actually flagged every single one of these issues. Scouts noted that he sometimes struggled to catch the ball, that he got pushed around by stronger players, and that he looked completely helpless against certain physical matchups in college. Those warnings turned out to be exactly right. He made approximately $17 million in his NBA career before the league moved on from him entirely in 2014. But here's where Thabeet's story took a remarkable turn. After leaving the NBA, he played in Japan, Taiwan, China, and his native Tanzania, winning championships and individual awards at every stop. In Taiwan, he was named Defensive Player of the Year. In Tanzania, he led his team to a regional title and was named Finals MVP. He never stopped competing and never stopped winning once he found the right level. And then in February of 2026, Hasheem Thabeet was elected president of the Tanzania Basketball Federation. The man that was picked before Harden and Curry is now running basketball operations for an entire country, building the infrastructure that might one day produce the next great Tanzanian NBA player. UConn also announced his induction into their Huskies of Honor ceremony in January of 2026, recognizing what he actually accomplished in college rather than what he couldn't sustain at the next level.
Sincerely, one of the greatest players ever in UConn history, Hasheem Thabeet.
The NBA chapter of his story is one of the most painful in draft history. Everything that came after, though, told a completely different story about who Hasheem Thabeet actually is. Now, take a seat back and look at everything we've covered today. The journeymen who somehow stuck around for a decade, the lottery picks who never delivered on a single expectation, the players who found redemption overseas and the ones still searching for it. One question cuts through all of this. Who is the worst player of all of them? And when you strip everything back and look at the stats, the opportunities, the expectations, and the outcomes, there's really only one answer, and his name is Anthony Bennett. Here's why. Every other player on this list had something working in their favor when the argument gets tough. Darko had Larry Brown refusing to play him. Kwame had Michael Jordan breaking him down at 18 years old. Thabeet had legitimate college dominance that justified his pick. Vesely found his way to become a legend somewhere else. Even Scalabrine carved out 11 seasons and a championship ring by knowing exactly who he was. Bennett, unfortunately, had none of that. The 2013 draft was already considered weak going in, and almost nobody had him as a top 3 pick, let alone number 1. Cleveland used the most valuable asset in basketball on a player that the rest of the league essentially said they didn't want. And then he went out and proved them right in the most historically comprehensive way possible. Never averaging more than 5 points per game. Never starting more than just a handful of games. Shot 29% in Toronto. Became the first number 1 pick in history to get sent to the D-League, and ultimately gone from the league entirely at 23 years old with a career average of 4.4 points per game. No number 1 pick in the history of this league has ever produced less. That's not an opinion either, that's the record. But before we close the book on Anthony Bennett entirely, we have to acknowledge something important. Bennett grew up in one of the tougher parts of Toronto, worked his way through the system, earned a scholarship, and put up genuine numbers at UNLV. He got himself onto an NBA draft board through his own effort alone. The pressure that comes with being the number 1 pick would have broken most people before they even set foot on a professional floor. He was just a kid when all of it landed on him at once, and he never stopped playing. Not when Cleveland moved on, not when Minnesota moved on, not when Toronto and Brooklyn moved on. He kept going, grinding through leagues across the world, still competing professionally at 32 years old because the love for the game never left even when the game seemed to leave him. By every number, every opportunity, every standard this league holds its players to, Anthony Bennett is unfortunately the worst. But let's not get confused here. The worst player in NBA history is still a professional basketball player who made over $16 million, played in the greatest league on earth, and lived a dream that millions of people around the world will spend their entire lives chasing and never come close to touching. If you guys did enjoy this video, please drop a like, subscribe, hype this video up, and be sure to check out our podcast channel where we cover daily NBA news. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the videos that are popping up on your screen right now. I'm sure you'll love them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.